Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilvin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 5 of my Witchwood card review. This time around I have a new legendary for Warlocks and 3 other new cards revealed today. So if you don't have a ton of time, you just want to see these new cards, you can use the link in the description, skip to the end, check out the cards. If you do have a little time and you want to listen to me discuss these cards at great length, then let's go ahead and jump into the detailed reviews. Up first here, I have the Warlock legendary Lord Godfrey. This is a new 7-mana minion. He's a 4/4, and his battle cry reads, deal 2 damage to all other minions. If any die, repeat this battle cry. That's a nice little rhyme. So essentially, Lord Godfrey is like a double Defile on a stick. It's this upgraded Defile. It operates exactly the same way as the card Defile, except it's for 2 damage instead of 1. And that's going to make it a lot easier to line up the math than you have to do with Defile sometimes. That's going to make it much, much better at wiping out boards. There's little doubt in my mind that this will be an efficient board clear one way or another. It's gonna work. It's gonna kill stuff. Sometimes Defile's a little shaky in that regard. Lord Godfrey's going to be so much better at ensuring that things actually die. Now, that said, I think Warlock did not need another great board clear. They already have so many options. They already have so many control tools. They already benefit so much from killing their own minions, and this just gives them more of those same tools. So that's a little bit intimidating. Like, Lord Godfrey is clearly going to be an awesome swing style card. He's basically like a Flame Strike with a free Arcane Tyrant attached, which is really good because it means you're going to kill most of your opponent's stuff, and then you're going to get a little body on the board to trade into the next thing they play as well, or just do some damage. You'll have initiative regardless. So that's all fantastic. Like, clearly that's really, really good. You could put this card somewhere in between a Hellfire and a Twisting Nether, essentially. But as a swing card, there's little doubt it's going to find some success in slower, more control-oriented Warlocks. Now, that said, I don't know that Lord Godfrey is necessarily a card that Q block, as we understand it today, wants to actually run. He might not fit in all that well. The more control style variant we've seen that's got more cards like Gnome Ferratu and is more focused on defense, that version could run Lord Godfrey successfully, but the full Doomguard version with, cubes and Umbra and Taldarum, I don't think that necessarily needs something like Lord Godfrey. He might not fit into that puzzle all that well. And the reason I don't think Lord Godfrey is included in every single deck is that ultimately he's just a little bit slow as an anti-aggro tool. Hellfire being 4 mana is super important. Defile being 2 mana is really, really vital. Those are both cards that you can place very early in the game, and they're going to clear boards. They're going to contribute to keeping you alive. Lord Godfrey, on the other hand, is going to sit in your hand for a really long time if you're looking for early board clear kinds of plays. Lord Godfrey's not the card you want to draw. Now, he's still fine in mid-range matchups. I think he's okay in control matchups. There are often still scenarios where you can enable him to clear your opponent's stuff. But I do worry that he has just a little bit of a tweener aspect. I've been using that word a lot lately, but that's because Blizzard keeps designing cards that sort of fall in the gaps between separate things, or, aggressive versus late-game style cards. And although Lord Godfrey's obviously a defensive card, a control card, he's a card that answers things in the middle. He's not necessarily awesome against super fast decks, not necessarily awesome against control decks. That's the Twisting Nether. The Defile is the super early anti-aggro card. He's somewhere in the middle. Now, that said, I do think there are enough reload aggro decks in the meta these days. So, for instance, you clear the first couple waves of Paladin minions, and then in the mid-game, they just reload again. And Lord Godfrey's good in those scenarios. So I'm not saying Lord Godfrey's bad. I think this is a strong card. I just don't know that it's super, super amazing awesome like some people out there I've seen are saying that it is. I'm holding just a little bit of reservation because I do feel like he doesn't line up perfectly in the way that Hearthstone is played today. Still a card that's going to see some play. It's going to fit into some decks, but that tweener aspect is going to provide some challenges for Lord Godfrey, more so than I think some people are expecting. So keep your eye out on that. So up next, let's move on to a new warrior card. This is the Red Band Wasp. a new 2-mana 1/3 beast. It has Rush, and it has what we used to call Enrage, but of course the Enrage keyword is being removed, so now it just reads, has +3 attack while damaged. So this card becomes a really neat tool in the early game for Warrior. It can be used essentially two ways. You could Whirlwind this yourself, or of course damage it yourself in some way. Warrior is quite capable of doing that, in which case it becomes basically a 4/2 with Rush, and maybe you could trade it into something mid-sized. Alternatively, I think the real value for this card is not via activation from your own cards, but is actually via self-activation. In other words, your opponent plays a Silverhand Recruit or a Righteous Protector, Northshire Cleric, some little one-drop minion, and on turn 2, you slam the Redband Wasp. You kill the Silverhand Recruit, the 1-health beast that Hunter inevitably will play, the Searing Totem, whatever it might be, and now you have a 4/2 minion on board. This guy is like the ultimate early game tempo swing against tiny little token minions. And of course, in Hearthstone, there are tiny little token dudes everywhere. Right now, they're all over the meta thanks to Paladin. There are so many little 1-health guys everywhere. That may not necessarily be the case in future metas, but it's always going to come back where there are some decks that run fast, aggressive early game minions. And I think Redband Wasp can single-handedly help choke those out. I think this could be used in an aggressive warrior deck that just, it basically looks to become really aggressive and become the murderer that it is in like turns 3 and 4 and 5. Not necessarily turns 1, 2, and 3 like a lot of aggro decks would do today, but in other words, it plays to swing the board in its favor in the mid-game with cards like Frothing Berserker, for instance. Redband Wasp helps set that up, helps protect it, helps ensure that the opponent isn't able to do anything super crazy, super fast, just by keeping their board in check, giving you just that 1 or 2 turns extra to start stabilizing your own threats and swinging the game in a major way and putting them on the back foot, essentially, as opposed to being the aggressor. Because as soon as you put an aggressive deck on the back foot and they're using their cards defensively or to trade into your stuff, then you've started to win the game. And I feel like Redband Wasp is going to enable that perfectly. Just because of the fact that it can attack immediately thanks to that rush, kill that small minion, it remains like a 4/2 or even a 4/1 on the board. That's a really big threat. And in a deck that's like a mid-range warrior, maybe an aggro warrior, that's enough pressure that it takes a good trade and becomes a huge threat that's going to chip away at your opponent's health total. I see a lot of potential there. I think that's really, really cool. Now, this is a card that becomes far less exciting in the late game. It's not like a great top deck. A card that kind of came to mind for an instant comparison for this one was the old card Alex Straza's Champion, which was basically a 3/3 charger right off the bat if you had a dragon in hand. And that card, I think, had way more utility than Redband Wasp, obviously, because it could go face, it could still take some value trades. So it did require a condition to be met, which could sometimes make it hard to work with. But when it worked a lot better than something like Redband Wasp as a top deck, because it was still a lot of damage. If you top deck Redband Wasp, it's not going to be able to do much or contribute much. There's not always a 1/1 lingering around. And then the ability for it to take those value trades and buff itself become far reduced. And then you'd have to buff it via some other means, which means you're running 2 cards to make it good, and that becomes a challenge. So that said, I don't think it can be run in like control decks necessarily, just because it loses so much value in the late game. Maybe it still can. Maybe there's always 1/1s out there to trade into. I don't know. I still, despite that, think it's very strong. I think it has a lot of potential, just not like through the roof potential. There is a small cap here on what you can achieve with Redband Wasp, but I'm going to keep my eye on this one too, because I really like what this card does, and I think based on the way Hearthstone works right now, could be very, very, very strong. So up next here, let's talk about the new Hunter minion, the Hunting Mastiff. This is a 2-mana 2/1 beast. It has both Echo and Rush. Take all the new keywords and put them in Hunting Mastiff, guys. We figured it out. We made an awesome card. So, obviously, you slam this thing on the board. It can attack into a minion immediately. If you have spare mana, you can play another Hunting Mastiff. It can attack into a minion immediately. So, first, let me talk about what I like about this card. Spoiler alert, there are some things I don't like. But Hunting Mastiff is a very, very flexible card. It can do a few different things. And basically 3 things, right? The first thing you can do is trade into multiple minions, almost like an Unleash the Hounds. say your opponent has 3 2-health minions, you could play 3 Hunting Mastiffs and kill all 3 of your opponent's 2-health minions. Alternatively, you could use this a bit like a Forbidden Flame, where if your opponent has 1 8-health minion, you could play 4 Hunting Mastiffs for 8 mana and kill your opponent's 8-health minion, much like Forbidden Flame, assuming there's no taunt. And finally, the third thing you could do is just play some minions. You could just play 4 2-1s to build a board if you don't have anything for them to kill. So those are the 3 things you can do, and frankly, that's a lot of flexibility. It's basically an AoE sometimes. It's a single target removal card sometimes. Other times, it's just a board builder, which sounds really, really promising. But I'm sure you've heard the phrase, jack of all trades, master of none. And that's where the problem for Hunting Mastiff lies with me. It's really not doing any of those things very well. So in other words, the first example I described, killing 3 2-health minions, that's a 6 mana consecration. Not very good. Doesn't even do face damage, so it's worse than consecration. 6 mana volcanic potion almost, because your minions die too. Or at least these die. Killing a single minion, single target removal, an 8 mana deal 8 is like, sure, it's equal to Forbidden Flame, but if there's a taunt, it doesn't work. So that's a bit of a problem. And then finally, building a board, 10 mana to summon 5 1-health minions is not very good. That's a very susceptible, weak play. And half the value of these is that they have rush. And if you're just using them as build borders, then you board builders. That's a tough thing to say, apparently. Then you lose the value of the rush. So there's like not much point in that anyway. That's sort of a backup plan. Probably the worst of all 3. So in other words, it's like strictly worse than Power Shot, it's strictly worse than Deadly Shot, and it's strictly worse than just any sort of minion-based plane where you build the board. So to me, like, yes, it has a lot of flexibility, but none of that flexibility is expressed through particularly compelling or strong plays. So I don't know who's going to want to run this deck or this card. I mean, clearly I think it has to be a slower Hunter deck, because as a turn 2 play, Hunting Mastiff is just not good. Spending 2 mana to kill a 2-health thing or summon a 2-1 is very, very weak. Like, sometimes you might have to do it if you don't have other plays, but it's really, really subpar. And then as a 4 mana play, it's not very good. As a 6 mana play, it's not very good. Like, you really need to get to the later stages. Maybe it's 6, 8, 10 mana. Since it's a mix and allows a mix, like you kill a couple 2-health things, you kill 1 4-health thing, and then you summon a 2-1 for 10 mana. Like, that maybe looks a little bit better. So I think the only way it works is in a slower deck. Faster decks, I just don't see how they'd have any use for a card like this. There's just not enough there per mana to influence the board fast enough, or directly enough, or swing the board, or make a really powerful play, because losing minions is not something Hunter wants to typically do. So I think it works best in slow Hunters. Now, some people will say, oh, Regis, it combos really nicely with other Hunter cards. Think about things like Scavenging Hyena, or maybe you could run it with Cult Master. All these like cards that synergize on minion death, because essentially Hunting Mastiffs, because they only have 1 health, they're dying to every single trade. And yes, you could run this with Scavenging Hyena, but once again, Scavenging Hyena is typically best in the early game, when you get it out faster than your opponent can deal with it and it starts to snowball like crazy. And the problem there, of course, is that after you spend the 2 mana on the Hyena, if you're in the early to mid game, you just don't have much mana left for Hunting Mastiff. Yes, when you can play Unleash the Hounds and get 5 Hounds out of it for 3 mana and buff that Hyena 5 times, that's amazing. But when you can only get like 1 or 2 Hunting Mastiffs out because you only have a little bit of mana left, that's not nearly as compelling or swingy of an early to mid game play. So I don't see the potential for it there making a lot of sense. That to me does not look like some kind of enabler. To me, Hunting Mastiff still just falls short. I love the flexibility of it. I love that it can do so many different things, but I don't know what deck wants to use that. I don't know what environment that fits in. Frankly, I don't know what meta that's good against. It's not particularly great against Silverhand Recruits or Void Lords right now. Hunting Mastiff seems kind of terrible in those environments. In fact, you'd have to use 2 Hunting Mastiffs to kill 1 Voidwalker or 1 Righteous Protector. That's not a value kind of play in Hearthstone today. Now, obviously the meta can shift, but even then, these just don't look like they line up that well to me. If they were 1-2s, they might be better than 2-1s, frankly, because the face damage element just isn't there because they don't have charge. So despite the flexibility, a lot of weird gaps and doubts left with hunting Mastiff, so I don't really see this one seeing a lot of play. So up next here, let's take a look at the final card. This is Muck Hunter, a new 5-mana, 5/8 neutral epic minion. It has Rush and a battle cry that reads, summon 2 2/1 Mucklings for your opponent. So this card's a little bit hard to discuss for me, and there's a lot of different angles I want to talk about. So if I start to meander, bear with me. First off, I guess we should talk about the stat line. Clearly a 5/8 is above what you'd expect for a normal 5-mana minion, but frankly not that much above what you'd expect for a normal 5-mana minion. If you look at something like Draconid Operative, for instance, that's a 5/6 with this huge upside, of course. Even looking at a neutral card like Pit Fighter, that's a 5/6, no upside, but 5/6 is the standard. So basically you're getting a couple extra health points here on Muck Hunter. But you're also getting Rush, and Rush, clearly a very powerful effect. Allows you to instantly take a trade, remove something important from your opponent's side of the board. And around turn 5, the 5 attack here on Muck Hunter is good enough to kill pretty much anything that your opponent is playing in the mid-game, minus that occasional Draconid Operative. But of course, that card's rotating out of standard format, so hooray. But it doesn't kill everything. You know, there's the Twilight Drakes of the world, too, that it might have trouble dealing with. But most of the time, it could take a nice little value trade and hang back as, you know, a 5/3 or a 5/4. Have some health left remaining to trade again in a future turn. But clearly, there's a big downside here with Muck Hunter, and that is that it summons a couple minions for your opponent. And by the time you take that value trade, assuming nothing else happens, those 2/1s could very, very easily trade right back into your Muck Hunter. And then you're pretty much at a neutral state. You didn't really gain any advantage at all, other than just an instant trade on a potential threat, which would only very occasionally line up. It wouldn't happen all that consistently. And if you're waiting to use it as a fireball for a big threat, then it's sometimes a dead card in your hand without the flexibility of something like a single target removal spell. So that's a bit of an issue. But most people, when they look at this card and get excited, are citing the fact that you can combo it out with other stuff. So you can play Muck Hunter, and you can use a Whirlwind effect, like Warrior could Whirlwind down the 2/1s. Or you could use this to combo with a Mind Control tech and steal something from your opponent. There are a couple options. You could use Dry Whisker Armorer, like we've seen in the past with the card Cornered Sentry in Control Warrior decks. And that's how most people are explaining to me why Muck Hunter is going to be good. And I do think all of those are relevant examples and creative ways to use Muck Hunter. But typically, when I hear about multiple card combos and how that's going to make a card good, I have to immediately challenge that logic. And the reason for that is that if you have to run multiple average cards or even sometimes a bad card in order to empower another card, that it's almost never worth it. Usually you want a card to be good on its own accord, not have to line up perfectly with something else in your hand unless it's some sort of game-winning combo type deal. Or if it is some sort of 2-card combo, like we've seen with Cornered Sentry and Dry Whisker Armor, at the very least it needs to be cheap so that you can do it with other things without compromising too much, or that it doesn't disrupt your curve, or that you can use at least one piece of it with some value still. That's not the case with Muck Hunter. It's pretty expensive. By the time you played Muck Hunter and Dry Whisker Armor and a Whirlwind, that's your entire turn. And frankly, to get the value out of Muck Hunter in that sort of scenario, the board state has to be perfect. They have to have a minion that's good for Muck Hunter to trade into. Your Whirlwind can't affect your own side of the board too negatively. You might want to get some extra value out of the Whirlwind on top of just the 2/1 Mucklings. Otherwise, it feels like you used a Whirlwind just to make your Muck Hunter an okay card, and that feels like a real waste of resources because you drew a card. That's a spot in your list. So I don't like the logic that this becomes really good if there's some other card to work with it, because then it becomes a 2-card card. And the consistency tanks, and the flexibility of it tanks. So to me, since this does have some pretty substantial downsides of those 2/1s, and it's the kind of card that has to line up really nicely to be very good, I think that's going to hold it back from seeing play. Yes, it's sort of a Doom Guard sometimes. It takes a great trade on the board. Yes, but I don't think it's really a Doom Guard. I don't think it's quite that strong. It doesn't have face damage, first off, which is the primary way Doom Guard is used these days successfully. And certainly has some downsides like Doom Guard 2 with the discard. Of course, that's not even a downside anymore because Doom Guard gets played for free all the time. But still, Muck Hunter to me has more challenges than upsides. And that's why ultimately I think this card will fall a little bit short. I don't think it's totally terrible. I think it's okay. Maybe there will be one deck out there that lines it up perfectly. Maybe Warrior really does have a home for it. But it's going to be a bit of a struggle for Muck Hunter. This is not an obvious win for me. It's a bit of a grind and a fight to make this one work. So, not my favorite card of the set so far. And there you have it, folks. Those are my Part 5 detailed reviews. Bit of a mixed bag there. A lot of hope for me for Lord Godfrey and the Redband Wasp. The other two need a little work, need some inspiration, need the exact right deck list, I think, to make them work. So I don't expect to see them a lot in this upcoming meta. But hey, I've always been wrong before. I'll continue to be wrong again. So now what I'd like to do is jump into my quick reviews for each of these cards. Lord Godfrey is a 4-star card. Redband Wasp is a 4-star card. Howling Mastiff is a 2-star card. Muck Hunter is a 2-star card. And that's it, guys. That's part 5 of my Witchwood card review. So many more parts are coming. So many more cards are on the way. Couldn't be more excited about it. Couple promising ones here is always a good sign as well. Lots of utilization of Echo and Rush, which is exciting. I don't know if that's going to continue to be the case. I feel like they're dumping all the keyword cards on us first. Yes, Warlock is OP, and Lord Godfrey might make them more OP. That's another issue that you guys can argue about in the comments, I'm sure. But until then, everybody, thank you, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.